Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey, guys, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school here on the Cover 3 podcast. Today, we are talking Illinois, which finally broke through under Bret Bielema, and to do that, we're going to bring on Jeremy Werner of IlliniInquirer, the best guy covering Illinois in the business. We're really happy to have him. Jeremy, welcome back, man.
Thanks for having me, Bud. I always enjoy these.
Absolutely. So 8-4 last year. According to my numbers, the best Illini team we've seen in about 15 years. I don't have power numbers going back to when they made the Sugar Bowl, but it certainly had to be a pretty fun time to cover the Illini.
Yeah, they're relevant again, Bud. They're competent. They're competitive. It's rare to see. I mean, Bret Bielema, this is not something a lot of programs would, I guess brag about, but being 9-9 in the Big Ten the last 2 years, it's pretty good for Illinois, which most people still think is a bottom of the Big Ten program. It has not been the last couple years. So I think that's a credit to Bret Bielema. Ryan Walters, of course, now is a rival at Purdue, as he did a fantastic job as a defense coordinator the last 2 years. And the offensive staff here, Barry Loney made a nice impact last year in his first year as the offensive coordinator. But yeah, I mean, 8-5 is a big breakthrough. I think anybody would have said that was a great season for Illinois. But to be honest with you, Bud, it's a little bit of disappointment in the way it ended. Illinois was 7-1. They had the Big Ten West title in their hands entering the final month, and they lost back-to-back games to a Michigan State team that was reeling at the time, Purdue, which obviously went on to win the Big Ten West. So I think Illinois had a great year comparatively to what they've had here recently, but they also missed some opportunities. I mean, they had some really good talent. We saw a lot of those guys get drafted. So there was a little bit of missed opportunity in that season, but certainly I think Bret Bielema has shown that he's doing a really good job, and he's got a really good staff and that they can develop talent. And now next year, 2023 is all about building on that. They did a really good job in the offseason of retaining a lot of key players, even though they lost some guys to the NFL draft, of course. But I think they have a strong foundation in the trenches, and now we'll see if the offense can take another step forward this year.
You mentioned the retention. I thought that was pretty big. When I go do my roster analysis, they lost guys to the NFL, but they did a pretty good job, and maybe this reflects their culture of not losing dudes to the transfer portal who are important players. I don't know if Bielema has talked about that or not, but there are some schools that really got picked over in your league, and Illinois is not one of them.
It's the biggest story of the offseason outside of maybe Luke Altmaier coming to Illinois from Ole Miss as a transfer quarterback. Illinois' retention was huge because we could talk about the sexiness of having a top 10 recruiting class, transfer class, all of that. Nobody that they could have gotten in the portal was as good as Johnny Newton, who had significant interest from SEC teams, even though he did not go in the transfer portal. Keith Randolph is an all Big Ten defensive lineman who has a chance to be an NFL draft pick as well. Isaiah Adams could have gone to the NFL draft, been a mid-round pick. He came back to try and be a first or a second-round pick on the offensive line. Julian Pearl returned for a sixth year, even though he talked about, I don't know if I want to go to school for another year. He's coming back. So Illinois did a great job of focusing its NIL on retention more than the transfer portal. But that's just given them such a huge boost. And they lost maybe one guy or two guys that were in there too deep. Brian Hightower went to Cal to be closer to home. CJ Hart seemed like he lost his starting job to Dylan Rosiak, a redshirt sophomore. He decides to transfer to Oregon State. That's all that they lost from their too deep in the transfer portal. So that's significant, I think, nowadays. I think retention is one of the hardest things to do. So that tells me, one, they like playing for Bret Bielema. They trust him. He's talked about how there's a difference of they know what it was in the previous staff and what it's like now. Plus, they're seeing Devin Witherspoon, Sidney Brown, Quan Martin all go in the top 100. Kirby Joseph 2 years ago going the top 100. They think this staff can put him in the best position for the long term.
You mentioned a lot about that defense. Last year, third in Bill Connolly's SP+, which is a ridiculous rating, especially because defense typically closely aligns with your defensive recruiting ranking. So the fact that the Illinois is up there that high, I think that speaks volumes to the scouting and player development that they've done. Basically the entire front seven that matters came back, and that's got to be a great building block to build on. You mentioned Newton. Is there another guy up there that we think is going to be just like a no doubt NFL type guy?
I do just want to talk about Newton for a second. He's a wrecking ball. I don't know, but if there's anything more he can do to help his draft stock, but he's certainly being projected right now as a first round draft pick. So I don't know how many people know the name Johnny Newton quite yet, but he led Power 5 interior defensive lineman in pressures according to Pro Football Focus, and it wasn't that close. So he's an unbelievable talent. But Keith Randolph took a step forward last year, was right behind Newton in some of these stats, but he's still sort of new to football. He only played 2 years of high school, was a really good basketball player, and now he's starting to come into his own. 6'5", 300 pounds now, pretty versatile. But the two guys on the outside, this is the great part about their front four, which Bud I think could play for Michigan. I think they could play for most of the teams in the Big Ten and be one of the best Big Ten defensive fronts. Seth Coleman had a bit of a breakout, former 4-star prospect on 24/7 Sports. He had a stretch of games that were really good, faded a little bit towards the end of the year when he had some injuries. But then freshman All-American Gabe Hackis is on the other side. And he was a 3-star gem that Bret Bielema and his staff found. SEC programs were interested in bringing him this offseason, but he decided to stay at Illinois. And that's monstrous because when you have 4 guys that are potential NFL guys on the same defensive front, that means you can't double team most of them. So that the defensive front is by far Illinois' strength. And given that they do lose 4 of 5 starters in the secondary, that should help. I don't think Illinois is going to be the number 1 defense in some defensive stats this year, but they should be a really, really good defense in the Big Ten. They got some young guys in secondary. They've added some transfers, including freshman All-American Demetrius Hill. Is going to play free safety for Illinois. He was at FIU last year. But that defensive front, Tariq Barnes, a linebacker, returns, should be really, really good, which allows you, obviously, to do so much more defensively.
In the back end, they lose 4 guys, 3 draft picks, and the 4th who pretty much immediately got a UDFA invite to a training camp. That one of the most talented, if not the most talented secondary in the Big Ten is now completely rebuilt. They did a lot of interesting things with that group last year. How big of a drop off are we expecting here? And who are some names we should know? I guess like clearly there's going to be some drop off if you have that much loss, whether you're Georgia, Illinois, whomever.
Yeah, you don't have Devin Witherspoon, a number 5 overall pick in the draft. The first top 10 pick for Illinois since Kevin Hardy and Simeon Rice back in 1996. So yeah, you don't have another guy like that. Sidney Brown is an unbelievable talent, leader. And you got to replace all the Quan Martin was an unbelievable, versatile piece, kind of under radar, probably nationally, given his numbers weren't quite as big as the attention wasn't quite as big, but NFL teams.
He was a basketball kid. I used to live in Fort Myers, and he was at Lehigh. And James Chaney, who's now the director of player development at Colorado for Dion, was Lehigh's head coach. And I was out at practice. Clemson's quarterback coach Streeter was there at the practice, and he was like, "Hey, we just got this kid over from basketball. Like, check him out." And he had like crazy. I didn't work for 24/7 Sports at the time. This was 5-6 years ago now, but that was a good find by them. He had some serious hop. I don't know what he verted at the combine, but it's like this guy's got some springs.
Well, and this is where we got to credit Lovie Smith and his staff.
Yeah.
Well, they had plenty of issues here, but they could identify defensive back talent. Sidney Brown, I didn't even know who he was until signing day. Just announced that his NIL, and I was like, who's this guy? Turn on his film. Unbelievable. Devin Witherspoon was going to JUCO. I think everybody knows that story by now. And Illinois offered him after he qualified, and he turns into an absolute superstar despite some physical limitations weight-wise. And what they did with Kirby Joseph developing that, then you got to talk about the staff after that. This new staff, Ryan Walters deserves the job opportunity he got, was unbelievable putting these guys in positions to succeed. And these guys, he figured out what these guys were good at, where they were good at. Like Quan Martin was between corner and free safety. He excelled as a nickel. Sidney Brown was kind of overthinking things. And then all of a sudden he gets in Ryan Walters' defense and he can pull the trigger, and Ryan Walters let him do that. Kirby Joseph, who is a deep reserve, Kendall Smith, a deep reserve. Those guys have 10 picks combined the last 2 years. Really an unbelievable job of that. But yeah, how do they replace those guys? They have a lot of talent. They've done a good job of recruiting, but they've added a couple transfers. Nicario Harper was a FCS All-American a couple years ago, didn't play much at Louisville. They brought him in. Is he a depth piece? Is he a nickel? Is he a strong safety? We'll see. Demetrius Hill, the FIU transfer, they envision him as a free safety playing that Kirby Joseph, Kendall Smith role. But a couple guys in-house to look out for. Two guys who played a lot as true freshmen. Matthew Bailey, as a true freshman, basically just played in the dime package, and he had 3 interceptions in fewer than 200 snaps. It's a pretty unbelievable thing for a guy who didn't have any Power 5 offers until late last January. Xavier Scott played a lot last year, likely going to replace Quan Martin. So I think that experience helped. They had some injuries, and he played a little bit. And Tyler Strain, an undersized corner, got to play a lot last year too. They liked him. He's 5'9", but really fast, has added a lot of strength. But one guy that played a lot last year, and his absence was felt late in the season due to an injury, was Taz Nicholson, another Florida kid, another scrappy kid, kind of has that Devin Witherspoon mentality where he packs a punch. He took a big step last year, and they struggled a little bit when he was out of the lineup. That got some guys some extra playing time, but they have some bodies there. They have some pieces. They got to figure out where all these guys play. But Taz Nicholson, Matthew Bailey, Xavier Scott would probably be some big names to know there.
So probably not the third best defense in the country again, but still should be a pretty darn good unit. A little different profile with they blitz more than anybody in leverage downs last year. So
my question
change it up a little bit.
My question, Bud, is they played man-to-man coverage more than anybody in the country last year. Can you do that with a young group? Do they trust that young group to do it? They're still going to do it because even though Ryan Walters is gone, they're not going to change the scheme. Aaron Henry was hired internally, promoted, the defensive backs coach, so he knows all these guys. That's what they do. That is their identity. That's what they've practiced. So I expect them to do that. And if you can play man coverage with the front that you have, Illinois should be pretty good. I don't expect them to be the top defense in the Big Ten, but I expect them to be a top 5 defense, which should give you a really high floor.
Absolutely. So offensively, there were some improvements from prior years, but still the overall efficiency, I mean, 100th in SP Plus is I'm sure not where Bielema wants them to be. The DeVito loss to me is interesting. So the efficiency numbers were okay. Pretty high completion percentage, not a huge yards per attempt, but he did protect the football. I mean, just 6 turnovers, that's interceptions plus fumbles combined, which is strong. I know he got hurt a little bit, but how big of a loss is this? Because I feel like it's a loss that to you and me, maybe if we look at the numbers, not quite huge. Maybe the staff really valued is protecting the football. And who are they going to have to replace him?
Well, yeah, it's Illinois' numbers were not good last year offensively, but they were competent. They were competitive at times. Some games they didn't put up big numbers, but the passing game just was competent, which is a huge improvement. I mean, Illinois' passing offense has rivaled Rutgers the last couple of years before Barry Lundy Jr. arrived. And Tommy DeVito was just a veteran. He was just a guy you could trust to make the singles. He's going to hit singles, right? He's not going to have turnovers. He's not going to strike out a lot. He set a record for completion percentage for Illinois last year. Part of that's the scheme, but part of that was Tommy and his accuracy. So they turned to Luke Altmaier, who played a little bit at Ole Miss, but just a huge drop off in experience. So I expect some growing pains with Luke Altmaier, but he's got a lot of the skill set that Tommy DeVito does. He gets rid of the ball quick. He's accurate as a thrower. What they're hoping is, the run game should be strong. I know they lose Chase Brown, but it's a Bret Bielema offense. They have a good offensive line returning. They have a couple good running backs that they feel good about, Reggie Love and Josh McCray, and got some young guys they feel good about in Jordan Anderson, Aiden Lawfrey, Caden Fagan, a true freshman 4-star prospect. So they feel like they have the bodies to be successful there, but they need big plays. They were one of the worst teams in the country in big plays. Isaiah Williams would get a couple of them, but they were terrible outside of Isaiah Williams, their slot receiver, in yards after catch. It was just nothing after that. So they need to break big plays more often. Barry Lundy's got to figure out a way to do that. And then they have to score within the red zone. One of the worst teams in the country at touchdown percentage once they get in the red zone. Iowa was the only team that was better or worse than them in the Big Ten, and it wasn't by much. So Illinois scored a lot once they got in the red zone, but they settled for field goals. So they have to find a way to score touchdowns. I do think that's one. Chase Brown is an unbelievable player. He's great at a lot of things. He's not great at moving the pile. Like, he's not a power back in the red zone. And I do feel like Lunny and Bielema leaned on him too much in the red zone. I thought they could have used him more as a decoy. I thought they could have used been more creative once they got into the red zone. But they also just need to score more outside of the red zone, so they don't have to rely on 13 play, 15 play drives to score all the time. So that's gonna be fascinating. It's Barry Lunny's second year. He took a big leap his second year at UTSA as an offense. He thinks knowing the scheme, knowing the terminology can really help, but you're also going through a quarterback change at the same time. So if Illinois is going to take a step forward this year, the offense has to go from a small improvement to another significant improvement. And I think most of that has to happen in the passing game.
Yeah, if they can go from like a third ranked defense, like a top 15 defense, and 100th SP plus to like 80th, 75th, that should even out just fine. You mentioned Altmaier. The receivers are the other portion of this. Williams is back. Who else do we expect to be part of that formula if they do indeed have success and hit some explosive plays?
Yeah, I think the two knowns in that wide receiver room are Casey Washington and Isaiah Williams. Isaiah Williams was recruited by everybody as a wide receiver, Ohio State, Bama, Michigan. And he chose Illinois to be a quarterback. Bielema comes in and quickly he moves to wide receiver, which is where he should be. Casey Washington's a solid veteran, good blocker, great hands, moves the chains, not a guy who's going to create a lot after the catch. Just not that fast, not that explosive, but a good veteran you can rely on. So the key here is Patrick Bryant. It's his junior year. He had a semi-breakout last year, 30-plus catches, 450 yards. But for them to take another leap, they need a playmaker who can make plays downfield. And I think Pat Bryant has got to be that guy. He's 6'3", close to 200 pounds, kind of the build you think. And if he can take another step, I think Illinois' offense can take a significant step forward. They're very young outside of that. They've done a great job of upgrading the wide receiver talent in the underclassmen. Hank Beatty is a sophomore that they think is going to play. Kanari Wiltshire, a freshman from Florida who's a burner, they think can make an immediate impact. And a four-star prospect, top in-state wide receiver, Malik Elzy, was a big recruiting win for them. I think he can make an immediate impact, but you're counting on a lot of young, inexperienced guys. So they're still looking at the JUCO market to potentially add some depth. But I think Pat Bryant, outside of Isaiah Williams, is one of the keys to this offense taking a step forward. And maybe Tip Ryman, their tight end, was a really good blocker, took a step as a receiver last year, but he was not good on downfield catches. So he needs to take another step forward, and they need a little bit more from that tight end room in the passing game as well.
Bret Bielema seems to always have good offensive line play. They do lose the two Alexes, one a second-team All-American, one a second-team Big Ten player. What's the level of confidence they're going to be able to replace those guys?
Well, they feel Isaiah Adams could push Johnny Newton for highest drafted player on their team. They think that highly of what Isaiah Adams is. JUCO kid, was dominant at times last year, one of the best run blockers in the Big Ten. They track knockdowns. He had 120 knockdowns last year, which is their version of pancakes. The year prior, Doug Kramer led the team with about 80. So that tells you how many Isaiah Adams had. Wow. He needs to clean up some things as a pass blocker. He had some penalties that were costly, but he's got a great talent base. He showed a lot last year. They think he can be dominant this year. Julian Pearl returns for another season as their starting left tackle. Getting him back was huge. Zy Chrysler was a starter last year for them, a JUCO kid that, came in a little big, and they've been trimming him down. So another year of experience should certainly help them. Then you have two spots that they need to fill. Center is one where they've been looking to add a transfer. Josh Kreutz, son of Owen Kreutz, is kind of the first guy up right now in the spring ball, but they've been looking to upgrade that position. They had Avery Jones, the ECU transfer, and Auburn very late in the process was able to flip him. That was a big loss for Illinois, and they're still looking to upgrade potentially in the JUCO market. But between Josh Kreutz, Josh Geske is a redshirt sophomore who they feel is taking a step forward at tackle. And then they also returned Jordan Slaughter, who's kind of been their sixth man. It's probably going to be a battle between those three guys and potentially a transfer addition for who's going to fill those last two spots. So they have a good foundation with three starters returning, including two guys they think could be NFL draft picks next year. But who fills out those other holes is going to be, can they be a Joe Moore candidate again? I don't know, but I still think they think it can be a strength, but they're still trying to add strength to it through the transfer portal.
Absolutely. So, what is the position outside of quarterback where we feel the starters are much better than the backups? And if you have to end up playing the backups, you're probably in trouble.
It's the defensive line. The outside linebackers, they got a couple guys that can play. Alec Bryant's a former 4-star prospect that played pretty well last year. Ezekiel Holmes coming back from an injury. He started some games in his career. So they feel good about depth there. But outside of Newton, Randolph, they're starting T-Raw Edwards likely at nose tackle this year. He replaces Calvin Avery, who's in a Minnesota Vikings training camp coming up. But outside of Newton and Randolph, like it's a significant drop off from two guys who are NFL draft picks to the next group. They have a couple of veterans, Bryce Barnes, a former walk-on that can be reliable as a rotation player. They had a Denzel Daxon, a transfer from Ohio, to give him some depth at nose tackle. And they're talking up a little bit Ced McConnell, who could be a key piece for them. A redshirt sophomore who was in Lovie Smith's last recruiting class. He needs to take a step forward because they need to figure out who's up after Newton and Randolph for 2024. I think they're probably going to have to hit the transfer portal, but their D-line recruiting suffered through 2 recruiting classes. So if Newton or Randolph does suffer an injury, that could be a big concern because they don't have 2 more guys or another guy quite capable of doing what they're doing.
Jeremy Werner, IlliniInquirer, thanks for going to school on Illinois.
Appreciate it, bud.